see any questions in the chat, but if you do have any questions for Chiara, contact her privately. You'll receive the contact details in an email a few days after this event. Thank you, Chiara, again.
Thank you.
And we will now move on to Clint. Clint, can you hear us?
I can. Thank
Here
you.
you are.
Great job, Tara.
Thank you very much.
Stage is yours, Clint.
Thanks a lot. I will pick up right where she left off. How about that? So my talk is kind of what I call a walking deck. I've been using quite a bit with developers who join my teams. Just, you know, you never know what kind of background or what experience developers or even any team member honestly has with Agile. And I'm getting a bunch of noise outside, so I'm gonna move real quick. So I built this deck just to kind of provide a general introduction and kind of guiding principles around how to think about Agile and Lean. So let me go ahead and get started. You guys still hear me okay?
Yes, yes, I do. I'm sure everyone else.
Sorry.
Not now.
Is a manufacturing and production approach. So it has roots in something far, far beyond what software development is all about, but that doesn't mean we can't use those principles. And one of the big ones is defining that value, as Chiara mentioned, and we cannot build what our customers need if we don't define it clearly and give it to our developers and to our development team in order to build it. So there's a number of different ways this takes shape. You've seen things like customer journeys. Some teams and some departments use scenario or task-driven design. Other groups use user story mapping, where they literally sit with a customer and kind of interrogate them and get the ideas out of exactly what they need to build. And if you've worked with any of the scaled frameworks, you may have heard of something called a PI planning, or a program increment planning event, which is where you get the whole organization together in kind of a big jam session and try to define and lay out and plan what you're going to build over a medium to longer period of time. So the big picture is we want to define that value up front so that our customers and our development teams understand what it is we need to build. Typically, this is done with a story. There's a lot of forms. In Scrum, they call them a PBI, a product backlog item. The actual form that it takes isn't necessarily as important as the fact that we all agree to it in some form of working agreement, that this defines what the value is and how we're going to deliver it, and more importantly, how we're going to verify it. And if you don't get those, I tell developers, if you don't get a clear enough picture of what you need to build, you have every right to decline, to say, no, thank you, I'm not going to build that for you because it's too vague. So over time, teams develop, a working agreement that describes the value they want to deliver in a way that they can accept it, that they can estimate it, and to some degree, put a stake in the ground and say, yes, we can build this. Next step is, as a team, defining that value stream. I mean, this is the core of how Lean applies to software development. We're literally creating a factory for developing software where we get new inbound requirements. They go through various stages of development to the point where we deploy them, right? And what we want to do is we want that work to flow across the different states and get to our finished product. This is our software factory, for lack of a better term. And you can see in this particular example, this is one example of the, oops, sorry, let me get my ink off of here. This is one example of the criteria that we defined as a team in our working agreements for the different qualifications it meant for the cards to be in each of those states. If you don't have this or it's undocumented, there's a chance that some of your work may be slipping through the cracks or maybe missing some of the validation it needs to really do a great job. And the next step is to make that value flow. I drew that line. We want to see this work moving across these boundaries. And more importantly, if you're starting to see pileups and backups where you're getting bottlenecks in your process or in your pipeline, those need to be addressed, right? So we want that work flowing. We want all the work that's going on to be visible. I prefer my teams work the board rather than the room. A lot of teams will meet during a daily stand-up and they will say, hey, Clint, what are you doing? Luca, what are you doing? Josh, what are you doing? But that doesn't let you see and put an emphasis on the work flowing and getting done through the pipeline. So what I like to do with my teams is we walk the board, and I can even show you one live that we did this morning, where we literally start over here on the far right and talk about UAT and make sure that UAT is getting done, and then work our way backwards. Hey, there's a roadblock, or what can we do to unblock that? Testers, what do you need to get your job done? And then working our way backwards to developers. And this, to me, it's such a small thing and a change to the routine, but what a huge difference it makes in emphasizing to the whole team that our goal is to ship working software and to move these cards across the board. So a very small change to the way a lot of teams do their work, very subtle, but in my opinion, a huge difference on the way the teams think about their work and how they interoperate and collaborate with each other. Let's see, we got questions. I don't know if I can get the chat window up. James, do you mind reading those off?
Yeah, sure, no problem. It's asking, what is a UAT5, user acceptance test? Someone has already answered. So,
what is a user acceptance test? So that is, I don't know if I had it on there. That is where you either have a direct user of your software or a representative of that user. A lot of times it's the product owner. We'll look at the final finished story or the finished piece of work that the developers built and do that final sign off. So in this case, yeah, the 5 represents how many cards there are sitting in that column. But UAT is, in our case, we have a designer who does all the design work for the product. After the testers test it and verify that the functionality is, the designer, as our representative of the customer, does the final sign off saying, yes, this is good in production and we're ready to go. Sorry about that. Does that hopefully answer the question?
yeah, I'm sure it has.
Cool. All right, moving back. So again, the big emphasis I put is we want this work to flow. And as a leader and a coach on a team, I am constantly watching this board to see if there's things getting stalled. A lot of the tools will let you put in color coding. I think in Jira, it actually has these little dots. I don't know if you guys can see those. Those little dots tell you how long a card has aged. And in other tools, you can change the colors. But what I'm looking for is making sure that someone doesn't get stuck, either a developer or a pair collaborating, that their work isn't getting hung up, that it continues to move forward. And it goes a long way towards teaching a team to collaborate. It's really interesting. You approach it this way and teams start to think, well, how can I, if I'm stuck, how can I get someone to help? Or how can I get the resources I need to get this unstuck and keep the card moving? Because I know it's important for the work to flow across the board. Oh, there's my chat window. All right, here we go. As Chara mentioned earlier, Lean is a pull system, not a push system, meaning you put work and make it available to developers, and as they have capacity, they go grab a story and pull it to the next column. You cannot push work onto a team. What happens there is you do end up with bottlenecks. You end up pushing work faster than the team can do it, and ultimately it's not going to get done. Your customers are not going to get satisfied. A lot of strange and bad behaviors are exhibited when you start pushing work onto a team. I put this video out here. If you have not seen it, this is one of the classic examples of what happens in a push-based system. I highly encourage you. We don't have time to watch it today, but I highly encourage you to go out to YouTube and watch this. It's an incredible story of how you push work faster than people can do it. And I bring this up every time I see this happening in a team, and I make them watch the video to understand it. But how that manifests itself in a board or in a system is you have queues. So in this case, I have a queue for developers. They pull from to do into progress. They get into code review, which is where we get it to a point where we can deploy it for QA, and someone has to take a look at the code. So there's a queue for code review. At that point, it gets ready to QA. It gets ready to test when it's been deployed for a tester. So that's a queue. Testers are actively testing it. And UAT is the final kind of queue for the last approval before it goes into production. So the queues are one of the most powerful secrets you have in your toolbox to create a pull-based system.
Clint, someone is asking what roadblocked means.
Roadblocks means there's something that this story needs to continue that is either external to the group or is dependent on something back earlier or further back in the pipeline. Basically, roadblocks means we didn't plan right. This case, this report is an export, but the report hasn't written yet. So this story was sequenced, or this card was sequenced too soon and is waiting on something further down the pipe. Other examples of roadblock are we need to get information from some department outside of our group, or there's a customer that we need to get feedback from that we don't have ready access to. That's another area where you want to look explicitly for bottlenecks, is if things start to back up and roadblocked, you got to be pretty aggressive about getting those taken care of. They tend to manifest as a bigger problem elsewhere, such as sequencing or a dependency outside your department. Not a good thing, and we try to keep that at zero as much as we can. Great question, thank you. So that was kind of the quick and dirty of Lean, and what I did is I took the kind of the official Lean principles and I turned them into a way to think of them in more visible and more pragmatic way. And I'm going to do a similar thing with Agile. So Agile is a movement driven by a manifesto. And in that manifesto are a set of principles and a set of belief structures that help us guide our way into delivering software. And I kind of, again, I'm kind of going through some of the high level things in there that I think are important for someone brand new to a team, brand new to Agile to pick up on. So the first is, it's about people. People make software. And you cannot ignore the fact that people make software, despite the fact that many of our customers, especially in IT companies, who are literally paying a person to be, an hourly rate, to be a body in a seat, to crank out software as if it were a manufacturing process. So we take Lean, which is manufacturing, and we layer on some people-based and some more behavior-based patterns on top of those, and that's where Agile really comes into play. So you cannot forget that people make software. This, in a lot of ways, this means a lot of things. People, there are varying levels of skills, right? Think about the teams you are on or that you work with. Not everybody has the same level of experience, same level of skills. Not everyone personality-wise has the same level of introversion or extroversion. And so, I look at this principle and I say, how can I engineer or socially, manipulate's probably the bad word, but socially collaborate with my team to get the best results. And that manifests itself in a lot of ways, such as putting a junior developer paired with a senior developer, or an extroverted developer paired with a more introverted developer, to kind of bring out the best in both of them and ultimately get the whole team to kind of perform at a level where they all work together and they all collaborate efficiently and effectively. Close ties to the customer. You've got to have your customer involved. Chara said that earlier on as well. You cannot build a piece of software in a vacuum. And I see it all the time with my clients. They meet with a customer briefly, an hour, 2 hours, maybe a day, and they go off and build something and the customer doesn't see it for a month or 2 months or 3 months. The likelihood of them getting the product they want diminishes with every minute longer that delay happens between when they ask for it and when they get it. So have to have tight collaboration with the customer. This set of pictures is from a PI planning event, which is a big 2-day exercise where you get all your customers and stakeholders in a room with your development teams. They collaborate heavily to kind of build a plan, to kind of root out the backlog for a bigger effort. And it's such an amazing thing to see. You've got to have them involved and you got to keep them involved. So we do these 2-day exercises to kind of build out the big picture and an initial pass at what a plan might look like. But then we also make sure the customers stay involved the whole time so that we don't get too far off the rails before we get kind of course correction and back onto to building the right thing. Delivering value. This speaks directly to the core of what Lean is all about, and then layering on Agile, which is how do we make sure our customer is satisfied with the best value we can give them. This diagram is one I use pretty frequently. These are 9 different teams I worked with at one of the enterprises I helped out. And this is called a cumulative flow diagram. And what this shows you is literally your ROI. This green color on the bottom is the ROI for each of these different teams and these projects. And what you want to see is a mountain of green growing over time. If you don't see this, then you know you have a problem. You know your team is not either getting what they need, delivering it to the customer, or having internal issues struggling to work effectively as a team. And you cannot fake this. This is probably, in my opinion, the most powerful diagram and metric in all of the tools we use. So if you're not looking at this on a regular basis, I highly encourage you to check it out. If you have a team that is doing this right now and you have the tooling, go take a look and kind of see where you stand. The interesting thing about these is most healthy teams all tend to be healthy in a very similar way. So number 5 here, number 6, 7, and 9 all have a very, very consistent and similar trend. They tend to be highly collaborative. And if you notice, they get better and faster as time goes on. The angle of this line is the velocity that team is producing value. The teams that struggle tend to be very, very different in how they struggle. And that's, looking at this diagram is only just that first step to figure out like, oh, I think we have a problem, and to start taking a look deeper into other metrics and looking at potentially what they're doing wrong. But big picture, this is an organization with 9 different teams, all aligned, delivering value. Some are doing well, some are not doing not so well. And then the last principle, which comes straight out of the Agile principles, is responding quickly to change. And to me, this is Agile. Agile is about adapting quickly to change. You get feedback from a customer. They didn't like what you did. We don't have heartache over it. We don't beat ourselves up. We just adapt and change the product and get them to what they need. They call it the sunken cost fallacy. A lot of pain and anguish is spent fighting and arguing over why we did things wrong and what we could have done differently. The reality is we need to adapt quickly and get it to correct and get it to right to satisfy our customer. That to me is way more important than, looking back. Now we do retros, and retrospectives are an important part of Agile, but the part where we beat up or we punish people for past performance is absolutely not in the spirit of Agile. It's about getting the best product to the customer, and heck, maybe even market needs change. And we thought we were building the right thing, and we planned for it and built it over a period of a few months. And now we realize after we deliver it that it needs to be something different. That's okay. That's life. That's how we evolve and change and grow. And again, one of the key principles, and I see a lot of people have heartache over this. So key takeaways. I'm running short of my time too. Grow a repeatable flowing process. I like what I call small bites, lots of chewing. If you build stories, keep them small. The larger a story is, the more likely it is to be off from the estimate and to have variance and potentially slip and be slower. So break your work down in really small chunks. It may look like a lot more work is getting done and than necessarily is being value delivered, but the fact that you break it into small chunks creates a more flowable system. Recognize when you're bottlenecking or stalling and aggressively go after it and solve those problems. Pivot mercilessly when your conditions change. That is really, again, the spirit of Agile. If things change, we don't beat ourselves up of it. We don't have heartache over it. We adapt and we change to meet that new need or that new demand. And staying very close to your customer at all times. A lot of teams go wrong when they think they know what they need to build and they let their customer kind of get at arm's length or get a little further away from them, and they don't continually synchronize with them and make sure they're getting validated in what they need to build. And kind of last but not least, understanding the difference between these principles and methodologies. The principles are the thought processes and guidance that gets us through to delivering value. The methodologies are concrete implementations that have been documented. You can get trained on them, you can get certified on them, but those at the end of the day still support and build up into the principles. Kanban is a pure methodology that implements Lean. Scrum builds on top of Lean principles, as Char said earlier, and implements Agile as well. Other frameworks are blends of these, and so on and so forth. Principles, practices, methods, tools. I don't get hung up on them. I think the more you get too tightly tied to a practice or a principle or a method, the less flexible it makes your mindset. And at the end of the day, value delivery and achieving the goals for that customer is what it's all about, not a methodology. There are some saboteurs. I think this is my last official slide here. There are things to watch out for that can harm you in a Lean and Agile sense. Influential team members who are not bought in, who actively resist the principles or the practices, or even changing the way they do things, which is part of adapting and growing. Old school project managers who want to manage by a spreadsheet or a Gantt chart. This is a very common question. Where do I put the due dates? Can I get a due date on this? When you hear that frequently enough, you know someone is actually trying to manage this in a way that's more of a pull model, where they want to say, here's a bunch of work, you'll have it done by this date. The reality is the work is going to take what it takes. And what we do is we use aggressive prioritization to deliver the most value early on, so that we don't, when we get to a time where we do, if we do have a hard due date, the work that we deliver is the absolute best, most valuable thing for our customer. We call them seagull leaders here in the US. These are flyby leaders who come by your desk and ask you, hey, Clint, can you work on this thing real quick? I know it's not part of the project, but I need this. And it could be hidden work, it could be distractions, or it could be a completely other project that they want to tear you off of. These are all warning signs that you're being distracted and you're potentially harming the flow in a project. Sometimes your customers are their own problem. They just want to throw it over the wall to the magic wizards that deliver software and say, go build this for me and don't bother me until you're done. That is not good. You frequently will have lots of repeat cycles where you thought you understood what they needed, you built it, turns out it wasn't, and you've got to do it again. And that just creates a lot of waste in a lean sense. And then my final saboteur, and I hate this one the worst, is matrix organizations, where you're only fractionally allocated to a particular project or a particular product. You know, so Clint, you're 25% on this, 30% on that, 12% on this, and there's no end to that. And it is absolutely the enemy of flow and the enemy of focus. And you'll see it. It's very common. I go into organizations and I go into a stand-up, and we have our 15-minute stand-up, and then I go into another stand-up, and 5 of the same people just went from one meeting to another. I'm like, this is a complete waste of time. You are killing your own productivity. So that's it, guys. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. Here are a couple book recommendations that go into much, much further detail than, of course, I can in a 20 or 30-minute talk. But I highly recommend you guys check these out. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Clint. Massive thank you goes to you. And I didn't want to interrupt you, but you had a few questions, especially relating to the slide on the graphics. Serene was asking, what does the grid shading represent? Some said ROI, I think it's return on investment.
Yeah, let me see if I can zoom in. So yeah, it's a little hard to read here, but the different colors represent your different stages in your Kanban board. So we've got, in this particular one, we've got submitted, grooming, groomed, active, ready for QA, QA, ready for UAT, UAT, and closed. So these literally represent the states your work go through. And at any given time, each one of these lines should float with a buffer just above the others. I mean, we could do a whole talk on that. I highly encourage you to take a look at Wikipedia articles on cumulative value diagrams and cumulative flow. And it will teach you how to read these. But bottom line is, a healthy team has just enough work queued and active to push it to the next level or next stage in their development pipeline without it backing up. You can see, even in these two diagrams, these are both healthy teams, but this team carried a lot more backlog than this team did. So in a lean sense, there's more cost and more waste involved in that team. So if this stuff, if you geek out on it, absolutely learn to use these diagrams. They're incredible.
Yeah, thank you, Clint. Thank you so much for your presentation and for providing such a valid example